Merci, thanks for the introduction. Bonsoir Toulouse, France et Nantes et Rennes. Là, je vois pas, je vois plein de villes. So thanks so much for the invitation. I hope you can see my screen. No, not yet, because I haven't clicked the right button. It's a great pleasure to be here, especially after 1 year. So I think this talk was scheduled already a year ago, and then things did not happen because of certain issues that we all know. So welcome to this evening, and I'm glad that zezhong.wang could join me tonight. So we're gonna split this talk a little bit. I'm gonna talk the first half, and then I hand over to Zezhong to talk about his work, because a lot of this data comics work that you're gonna see today is really part of his PhD. So Zezhong is a PhD student in Edinburgh, and he's about to write up his thesis. So very busy time, boring time where you have done all the exciting stuff, and now you just need to write that up, communicate your research to a lay audience, make things understandable, and say, what have you done in these 3 years, so to say. So in Edinburgh, we are part of the WISHub, which is our research group at the University of Edinburgh in the School of Informatics. And it's a large group now. It's rapidly growing. It's quite interdisciplinary, so we have designers like with the background in arts and design, like Zezhong. We have interaction designers, we have social scientists, we have people with the background of computer science and biology, and so on and so on. It's a nice group. It's a nice environment. And what we want to tell, so I'm here with Zezhong, and I'm going to introduce him after my part. So what we want to talk here today is about data comics, and it was really nice introduction, Alan, about the comics that you shared already. So there is something intrinsic in comics that we all kind of know and like, so to say. We all usually know comics from our childhood, and it's usually this kind of humoristic approach sometimes. But especially in France, I found there's a really, really strong comic culture. And really good comics, and the bande dessinée and everything really made a large impact. So what we want to talk about today is to take this repertoire of, let's say, familiarity on one side, so this medium that is familiar to everyone, and on the other side, the expressiveness, the visual expressiveness that comes with comic, because comics are highly visual. And their power for storytelling. So when we talk about comics, what we refer to is the visual narratives that tell us something in the combination of picture and text. And in particular, and this all kind of motivates this work that you're seeing today about data comics, to communicate complicated issues in the realm of data, to whatever audience you may imagine. You're going to see several examples today that are really trying to explore the range and the width of this new medium. So we want to look into what are data comics, what are examples, and we have created many of them, or have worked with people who've created some of those. We want to ask a question: are data comics effective? Because obviously we can do a lot of things, but we want people to better understand issues with data. We want to increase the communication. It's not about entertainment in that case. It is about understanding and engagement, potentially memory. So what makes these comics effective? We also want to talk a little bit about designing data comics. You may think, well, I cannot sketch. I'm not an artist. I'm not the designer, but I want to do something, because eventually communication is such a broad issue that it is not a question of whether you're a designer or you can sketch, because everyone has their issues that they need to communicate. So we want to look into how can we support the design of data comics. So let me go through some examples to show you what I mean. So first of all, the problem, what is again the problem that we're addressing? You all have come across these data reports where you have a story or a text that explains something about the data, like in this UN report. This is a UN report that talks about specific data in Uganda. And it shows you a set of graphics, the traditional bar charts, and it shows you this text. And what it does is in the text, it references these graphics and it says something about these graphics. Now, your job as a reader really is to go look to the reference, to find the graphic, go into the graphic, try to figure out what is the text wanting to say about the graphic, what is the graphic actually saying. And once you have figured out that, you go back to your text, you need to try to figure out where you have been and then continue the story. So there is a back and forth, there's a separation of story and content and data visualization on the other side. And of course, the text is nicely organized, it's scripted, it's authored, it's coherent in a sense, and the graphics are kind of exploratory. They show you a lot of information, but it's very hard to find where the text is talking about the graphic and what is it saying about the graphic. So how do text and graphics, where are they complementary? And of course, you can say, well, yes, we have infographics, which are, again, combinations of picture content and textual content, where the text is organized around graphics. So in this case, an example by Nadie Bremer from a science magazine about births. And she has these very nice visualizations, nice color scheme, and then text around. And it's kind of really up to you to explore the relationship and saying, oh, look, here it's talking about a specific spike. Here it's talking about the blue color. Here it's talking about the red color. You see this small legend on the bottom right that explains you how you can decode this visualization, and so on and so on. So again, it's a very exploratory piece. And when I was a child, I spent ages looking at these things. That's what really got me into what I'm doing now, actually. But at the end, it's up to you which parts of the text you're reading and piecing together sort of the story that this article wants to tell. And there's another approach. Those of you who know Hans Rosling, they know what I'm talking about, is this: someone talks me through the visualization, someone talks me through the data. And this is what made Hans Rosling's video here, his TED Talk, so famous, because he's walking, he's actually dancing almost people through this data. And that was a new way sort of to engage with these, with data in itself through visualizations, which is different from this dichotomy, almost the separated text and graphic that I have just shown. Now in comics, we're using some concepts from presentations or videos, if you want, and that is the notion of a panel. And a panel is a really, really interesting device if you think about it, because it's a moment in a story, it's a message. What you have in a panel is some sort of visual content. In this case, this route from Boston to Paris, and you have some sort of textual explanation. And these things together, they make up a message. So there's one message in this individual panel. And this panel is then followed by one panel and is preceded by another panel. And if I combine in my mind, if I combine these series of panels, I come up with a story. Mentally, I combine what are the messages in each of these panels. And that makes comics so powerful, because I can read them on my own pace. I don't need to wait for Hans Rosling to run around. I can read this on my own pace. And whenever I am done with one message, then I can move to the next one. So I'm not an English native speaker, or I'm reading a comic in any other language. I can just try to look up the words. And once I've understood, I go on to the next one. And I can dwell as much time on one panel as much as I want until I have really understood what this panel is saying. And there are there's a research area around comics, what makes comics successful, and this notion of the panel and the transitions between panels are really, really, really important. So even though those transitions are not happening through any animation, they happen in our mind, and yeah, there's there are many ways in which these transitions can work, but this is not the job of our talk today. And if you think about these panels and sequences, there are other formats that are alike comics, so to say, but which we would not describe as comics. So here we know all these airplane instructions, how to do something. We have certainly read some anatomic books from school that explains how specific organs work in this case. And we all are familiar with IKEA, I guess, and the assembly instructions and Lego and so on and so on. So we kind of used to this panel and sequence. Now, this has, of course, been used in other domains, so I can only highly recommend the scientific comics by Matteo Farinella, who is a comic artist who has a PhD in neuroscience and who's now creating comics to explain concepts around science. And then, of course, you can do all sorts of humoristic things with comics, for example, explaining algorithms, in this case, sorting algorithms, how they work. And apart from these, there's a huge community that explores with this language of comics. So whether these comics that I've shown here, they are really perceived linearly, you have a huge community that tries to break these boundaries and extend the boundaries of how we communicate through comics. How do we communicate visually? Ibn al-Arabi is one of the artists who is famous for his abstract comics. So you can try to figure out what is going on the left while I'm talking. It's a really interesting thing that explains us how we can use comics beyond the way that we know this from our childhood days, so to say, in terms of narration, in terms of expressiveness. And on the right side, we have a comic by Chris Ware, an American artist who is playing with non-linearity. And this is an interesting concept in the area of data visualization, because here what he has is this house in the center, which is kind of the context is almost like a stage, if you will. It's the context of the story. And then he follows up the individual people who are living in this house. And you can follow the people who are living in the top floor, or the woman that is walking outside of the door. And you're going to see how these stories unfold. And this is a book, I think it's called the House Stories or something like that, which follows the individual people living in this house over many generations, over many years. And at some point, these stories then cross again and influence each other. So again, it's a very interesting expressive medium. And if we think, well, if our job is to tell stories about data, about information, and explaining and educating, then these devices, they can help us to tackle some of the problems that we have in our complexity. Because everyone who has ever tried to communicate with data knows how complicated that can be to put everything in a linear order, because data is messy, data is multifaceted, there are multiple insights, multiple stories, potentially contradiction, and so on and so on and so on. So this is all really to motivate this notion of data comics and where it's coming from, what's the theoretic base. And here's another comic from Ibn al-Arabi, which I really like, because it's not about figures, it's not about characters, it's not about places or trees or human stories. It's really abstract, and you can read this comic, you know exactly what is going on without having any of these additional real world assets, so to say. And this is exactly what we're doing in data visualization, because we are working with abstract shapes and abstract concepts. And the notion of data comics, the term is coming from a 2016 paper, which I will put the reference in here when I share the slides, which is kind of looking into, can we just have graphics and a small avatar who's talking about those? So this is, I think, This is one way of doing data comics, to walk you through a sequence of visualizations and to explain the visualization, explaining insights, and so on. And we took inspiration from this and we said, well, what else can we do? Let's open this box, let's unpack this and see what is the expressiveness of this medium. So here we had a comic that is, for example, explaining the CO2 print that is caused by my flights in a specific year. So I was just trying to go, I went to the internet and I was typing in all my flights. I got the number of miles that was, and then I could convert this into the CO2 that these flights produced. There are calculators for all this stuff. And then I was able to calculate how much CO2 this produced. So in this case, with 23 tons that my conference and moving between jobs was actually producing. But still, these 23 tons was really an abstract number. I knew that I think the average on the world was something like 10 tons is good. So I was like, 23 is quite bad, but how bad is 23? And then I just went on and said, how many people are there on Earth, and how much CO2 is being produced at the moment? It turns out it's 5 tons per person. Of course, this is an average, and we all know the distribution is highly skewed. And then I was looking into different countries and saying, look, this is me. This is the average US citizen. This is the average German. This is the EU, and so on and so on. And then I had to stop myself because so many things are coming up that I wanted to compare this 23 tons and trying to understand how much is this, what volume is this filling, or how many cows do you need to produce the same type of climate gas emission, and so on and so on. So lots of new questions coming up just by me interrogating my own data, really. Now the result you see here, and it is a fairly, let's say, there are no persons, there's no, it's a fairly abstract comic that plays just with data visualizations, with explanations. I try to highlight things sometimes and saying, what is the difference? And just by doing this, you realize how many things are hard to express in comics. And that kind of motivated a lot of the future research. So to kind of summarize this a little bit, what are data comics? How can we describe them as a medium? We came up with 4 dimensions. One dimension is the kind of visualization that we put in. So in a data comic, we have a sort of a data visualization that shows us something visually about the world. And this can be realistic, and as in the photographs by Edward Muybridge, who was taking these photographs. And this could be very, very abstract in terms of isotype or bar charts, as well as just sketching, because maybe we don't even have the data, but we still want to visualize, like XKCD is doing, concept through data through visualizations and through these kind of the visual language of visualization. We also have a sort of a flow in these comics. This is not specific to data comics, but I think it's a very important point to say we can be very directed. We can just follow a linear flow, but we can also be completely open and invite everyone to explore a visualization, a full page. It's like this, where's Waldo? I don't know what is the French name, where you have to find this person in a big picture.
Chercher Charlie.
Chercher Charlie, voilà. More this, like inviting people to explore the visualization, finding the little details, maybe plotting the big world map and saying, look, here are the big polluters or something. So you can play with the flow to guide your audience through a comic, through a data set. And this is really, really interesting. Third, we have this notion of narration. And you can create comics, specifically data comics, without any text, just by showing an evolution over time, for example. I show you an example in just a minute, where you just let the data speak for itself, if you know what I mean. And then you can introduce all these kind of contextual devices, like people, contexts, landscapes, whatever you need, objects, so you basically you can illustrate your data, if you will, go away from the simple, all the static visualizations and the abstract language of data visualization into introducing people and stories and context and where the data is coming from and who is it representing and how do people look that I count in my data, for example. And eventually we have this space of words and pictures where we say, well, it's just a matter of combining text and visuals, and whether you have a text and you include small spark lines or a small figure just sometimes, or the text moves into your image and eventually you have no text because maybe your visualization just talks for itself. So this is one of the earliest, or maybe the earliest data comic I could find from Joseph Minard. I think you all know him well, which I think has all those components. It has a visualization, a map visualization. It's fairly abstract because it's hand drawn, and you see he moved the continents away. So it's not a satellite image. We all agree. It has some sort of text and narration, some labels, and here's the text that explains what it's showing. It has flow. It's fairly linear. We read 1, 2, 3, and yes. I think that's what I wanted to say. So it's a really nice example. It's good. It is at the same time, it's very exploratory because now I want to compare these lines and seeing which line is increasing, which line is decreasing. So it's still, there's nothing that tells me, oh, look at this, look at this, look at this. It's just showing the state and letting the data talk for itself in a way. Here again, we have examples which kind of come mostly without text. These are the examples from isotype, evolution over time on the top, the city that is expanding, and on the bottom we have different types of bird routes. And this is not time now, but this is kind of slicing my data to say, let's first look at this: the Pacific Flyway, the Central Flyway, and so on. And this is Zezhong's first data comic. I use this in all my talks because that's such a nice example. It is himself tracking his own sleeping patterns, doing his master's thesis. So I'm surprised how that would look now in his PhD. When he went to bed, when he woke up, how much time he spent on sleep during the week. And it's a really nice, simple example of, I look at my data and I want to tell a story about my own data. And you can see it's combining these elements of visualization here and actual illustrative narrative elements to say, look, this is the guy, this is Zezhong, it's really a person. And to kind of illustrate this a little bit, what does it mean, to sleep in this case? So I think it's an interesting device to think about this. Oh, data is always this abstract thing that just counts people, that is super quantitative, and data visualization is just a visualization of these quantities. But you can actually include these qualities and context and everything. But you can also, here's again, we're jumping back now to a very explanatory comic again. There's a clear sequence. We're telling here the stories of European alliances before the First World War, and how these alliances are being changed and created, which then create this kind of gridlock between the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance, which then kind of led to a very bloody war in a sense. So if you follow those ones, you can see that we're playing with the width of panels, the content, the amount of content in these panels. We have also sometimes very small panels to just show, here's something happening, an alliance is created or breaks apart. And then here, this is like an opening, more saying, look, this is the state in 1907. And this state has then kind of a very strong implication towards the outbreak of the war in 1914. And again, then we go down to daily actions to see whom attacked whom and how did the war unfold eventually. So again, it's showing a nice design space for comics for explaining with data. This example I already showed. we also explain. We also try to work with Illustrator, with artists and illustrators. So this is an example from Matteo Farinella, whom I already mentioned, to kind of get his personal style on explaining the story of CO2 emissions. And you can see it's very sophisticated. It's very different from the others that you have seen in this kind of four-dimensional design space that I was showing about visualization. He uses this hand-drawn visualization. Everything is hand-sketched. He does not have so many visualizations. There are a lot of illustrative elements to highlight what does it mean to talk about these data. You have kind of a flow sometimes, a linear flow on the left side. You have a very open flow on the left side, and you have sometimes the text is integrated, sometimes the text is besides, and so on and so on. Here's another example from one of our illustrators. So we ran a workshop and we linked up people from the university and illustrators, and to have them working on a communication project. It was a really, really nice, fruitful workshop a couple of years ago. Now this is showing the example, is talking about children and smoking and how many children are smoking and how does it impact their future. Now here, you wonder where the data visualizations. It does not have these classic data visualizations. It has sometimes data, 66%, 9%, but it's very subtle. And I like this because it's not scaring people away. Sometimes I have the feeling when you talk about data, when you talk about visualizations, people are scared. This is something for geeks, or I don't want to, I'm not into, data or science or something. So it's a really nice way. And if you look at the visual style of this artist, it is really compelling visual style. And of course, she's a pro in that sense. So she knows what she does. But again, still, we're telling a story about data, and she uses metaphors like this, the board game, which kind of represents the life, and then you have the players who make decisions, and then they choose cards, they make choices, and so on and so on. And kind of embedded in such a story. And we learned a lot about storytelling because we are not storytellers ourselves. We come from a computer science background, from a design background, from a visualization, human-computer interaction background, a graphic design, but not storytelling itself. We also did other workshops. Zezhong will talk more about this. And this is an example that came out of one of these workshops from a student about the trees. And you can see, again, a very interesting style, very nice style. Counting trees, no big abstract visualizations, a very nice hand-drawn pie charts. So again, a very nice mix of different dimensions in this comic. And this is maybe my personal favorite from this workshop. A really nice, compelling story about a frog that is explaining mass extinctions. And he's kind of, visualizations are boring, but hey, the data is important. Let's look at this. And it's full of humor, full of small points. And eventually he discovers that he's also on the list of species to go extinct, and that makes him freaking out. So it's a really nice story. You can find this comic online on our website, which I will share at the end, to not distract you from this talk. So really have a look at all these examples. And eventually, something that Zezhong and me were working on is explaining statistics, explaining statistical concepts in the context of reporting scientific studies. Again, Zezhong will talk more about this later, but again, it's a nice example. It's a use case where we are looking into, can we increase the communicability, the ability to communicate complicated issues that, like distributions, like hypotheses, like study setups, and so on, and their like. Now, to finish my part, this all might look massive, and indeed it is massive. So one of the questions that always bugged us is, how can you combine all the skills that go into creating these comics? Because you need certain skills from graphic design. You need skills from drawing and illustration, even if it's just a simple sketching, and just drawing consistently a specific context, a concept, like a stroke man. You need some skills about visualization design, which charts are good for representing what type of data, how to highlight insights, and maybe even, you need to create these visualizations, whether this is by hand or whether this is by a tool like Tableau or whether Python or some other sort of tool. You also need to have a bit of skills in data analysis to say, well, I actually know what I'm talking about. I know what I'm talking when I say mode or mean or median or clusters and these kind of things. You need even to prepare your data. And then, of course, you just need skills in storytelling, which is communication. How do I walk my audience through my insights, through my messages? How do I convince them? How do I argue with data? Just showing anyone a mean or a mode does not do the job. You need to motivate, you need to potentially explain what a mean and a mode and so on, what they are, what this means, what are the implications, and point people to the important insights in your data. So we engaged in workshops and sketching. It's everything needs to start as a storyboard, really. And we came up with a set of design patterns, which kind of interestingly map the potentially expressiveness of data comics. So on one side, we want to analyze what can we do, and we want to give people a stepping stone to say everyone can create data comics. It's just you need to have the right material. So we printed small cards that we gave out to people in workshops and say, look, just try to apply these patterns. For example, a zoom. And on the bottom, you see a zoom into Africa. And you all have seen this maybe in newspapers already when there's a small country that is not familiar to readers on that side of the globe. So a zoom, really a simple thing. Or you have one single chart. In this case, we have a line chart, but explaining multiple points about this one chart. So don't overwhelm your audience with a lot of text to one visualization. You can just repeat the same visualization and highlight the different points each time that you're explaining them. Time is another issue. You can use data comics to just represent the time, let the data speak, let people explore how the time evolves, what are the differences, how fast do things go, and so on and so on. So these patterns, they, as I said, at one side they show the expressiveness. What can you do with data comics? And at the same time, they should give people an easy way to start creating their own comics. And at this point, I want to hand over to Zezhong, who's talking about the question of, is all of this effective? I have shown you tons of examples, and I have shown you an analysis of design patterns, and I've shown you how these design patterns could be used to help other people creating comics. But is this all effective? Does it all make sense? Does it help us really being better communicators? So I'm stopping my screen share.
Thanks, Ben, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. I'm Zezhong, and the following 20 to 30 minutes, I'll introduce the research I've been doing about data comics. Please don't leave when I say research. It's not such boring, quite fun. Ben, I think Ben gave a talk about many potentials about data comics and cool examples. But before we making more data comics, before we push this idea to like in the wild or push it to the market, that this format actually effective in communicating data story. Is that better than other static format like infographics? To answer this question, we conducted a study to compare the effectiveness of data comics with other genres. This study was mixed of one in the lab study and one in the wild. And we focus on the aspects of comprehension, recall, and engagement with the same stories that present in 3 different formats. Like this is one of the examples, text plus pictures, infographic, and data comics. That's what we used in the lab study. And we used the dimension of reading sequence and the text picture integration to map out the design space for the three formats in our study. So as you can see, the first one, the text picture are separated, and the second, infographics, it's very integrated, and you can start it from wherever you want, left to right, and random point, and going through everything. And third one, data comics, is designed to be read in a linear sequence. And those are the other two stories used in the lab study. We designed them follow the same design principles. And in the lab study, we had 36 participants recruited from the university, went through a series of tasks, including retelling the story right after reading and in 24 hours, and quizzes for each story, and drawing their eye tracking, filling questionnaires and interviews. So as you can see, we want a lot from those 36 participants. And in the wild, we observed the interactions with people, whether they talk or point at the material. I observed them like hiding somewhere behind this scenario. And after that, I just picked random pedestrians and interviewed them about how they felt about those different formats. And this is a result showing the performance of the quiz, what we did after they reading the stories. So that indicates the comics are on average 23% more accurate than both text plus picture and infographic. And according to the result of subjective questionnaires, we found comics to be highest rated on the three measures of fun, engagement, and allowing people to stay focused. While for aesthetics and explorations, scores are like slightly less than infographics. Result from the in the wild study, we got very similar result, confirmed our conclusion. And comments from the participants suggested that some features they preferred about data comics, such as a high integration of visual and textual explanations, the sequential presentation of information, and the visual content for an easy for recall and quick navigation, and also providing different levels of reading, because information are grouped by the layout, and they can really easily access to a certain point where they're interested in. In our research, we focused data comics less about cartoons or visual styles, but definitely not because they're not important. They are a big part of fun and engagement, but we focus more on way of thinking, logic, and effective communication techniques. The promising result from the study encouraged us to do more data comic workshops and examples to explore the potentials, and by doing more practice with the students and different people with different background and even domain experts, and learning from cases about how to make use its advantages and benefit data-driven story communication. And Ben have sold those examples. That's what we got from the one of our workshops. For the sake of time, I won't talk too much about the examples. And here's a website, and we have a collection of examples and also our publications and some guidance running workshop. And if you think about running a workshop on data-driven storytelling and data comics, we're happy to discuss offline. So from those examples, we may find a lot of illustrations or characters, environments, but actually drawing is not a big issue. Like what Ben said, you can use stick figure and make very compelling results. But visualizations are more significant in communicating the messages. They are vehicles in data comics to deliver insights of data. And we use some of these graphics daily in our research and analyzing data and presenting results like the line charts, bar charts, box plots, scatter plots. But sometimes some types of visualizations are not used very often, like the adjacency matrix on the left and the time curve on the right. But those techniques become suitable and effective in presenting certain types of data. For authors, having chosen a suitable visualization techniques is halfway to successful communication. Then a valid interpretation is still needed effort, and it's a job for both author and audience. Last year, we present data visualization cheat sheets for facilitating understanding and using different types of data visualization techniques. So in this example, we can see each cheat sheet has a visual material covering the aspects that are vital for understanding a technique, such as anatomy. It explains the visual elements in our visualization techniques, and constructions reflect the relation between the data and the visual encoding, and the visual patterns that commonly to be spotted in real cases. The visualization cheat sheets can facilitate learning data visualizations, and also it provides visual solutions for explaining visualizations in a data story or graphs used in presenting result or study reports. We have seen many examples, and they look fun and engaging, also informative. So when I remember last first year when I gave a presentation about the effectiveness of data comics, and someone from the back of the audience shouted, "Do you think every Kai paper should have a data comic?" It was hard to say at that time, but it's worth a try. I mean, similar to data report, like the scientific report, study reports always have very compressed description. For example, a standard HCI quantitative study begins with context, motivation, and conditions, hypotheses, tasks, stimuli, materials. Then it details the participants, study setup, followed by data analysis and the result presentation. It's a lot of things, and moreover, they are full of domain-specific jargons and, of course, complex visualizations. And during the communication process, maybe the visualization is not like scary like this, but simple visualizations in a study report still can be confusing for readers. For example, like this one, what are those error bars indicate? Are they p-values or 95% confidence interval or 98%? And why these two charts have different x-axes? Are they presenting the same things? And what are those transparent bars in this context? If they are not explained in captions, and you'll need to find them in a sea of text. So the poor exposition, abstraction, and the notation like this can add research that and create need for interpretive labor. To make research findings more accessible to both experts and lay audience, a range of formats have emerged to complement the traditional articles. For example, the graphic abstract, posters, videos, interactive explanations. However, regarding the entire report, a graphic abstract like the two examples on the right side can cause important details to be sacrificed, such as the concrete descriptions of methods, decisions, and context. So we are looking for something in between the complexity and oversimplification to fill the gap in the middle. Here is one of our example, something you can put in your appendix or like a poster, in your project website or a blog post. And this example is made for a classic example of controlled study in visualizations. It compares these two visualization techniques in a lab setting. And these comics have 6 stages and follows a linear reading sequence. Let's go through each stage roughly. The context stage begins with an introduction and illustrates the construction of weighted graphs and raises the questions and motivates to the study. And then at the stage of condition and the task, it explains the conditions of the 2 techniques. And you can see here we use some visual solutions from the anatomy visualization cheat sheet. And the 3 vertical panels to illustrate the task flow of what users need to pay attention for in the task and what are needed to count, and shows the interaction of finish, a trail, and insert and answer with the interface. And the 4 hypotheses illustrate the expected results in terms of dependent variables by using annotated bar chart sketches. And this stage indicates the participants, setup conditions, and the screenshot of the interface present in the participants. And it uses 4 panels to show the order in which data sets were shown goes from simple to difficult in the study, and followed by the result and displays in a question and answer patterns. And each declares the winner technique for the independent variables and highlights the significant differences. And the last stage contrasts the initial hypothesis with the findings from the results. And also it reports which ones are supported or unsupported. And these examples shows 6 selected stages, and we have 10 stages for reporting controlled user studies detailed in the paper with more examples. And to see how did we come up with this, we went through an iterative process. And this is a flow chart showing the methodology of this paper. Yeah, this is our like sketches initially, and experienced several iterations from our own, and also we made 8 examples at the design exploration stages, and it was yeah, we also did a workshop and having participants to illustrate their paper, their study. And from the comments, participants really struggled to decide which part of the analysis should be included into a comic, because it's quite a large space and there's a lot of information. So such comments motivate us to identify what informations need to be covered. And we analyzed examples produced during our exploration and design discussion, and we distilled this initial list of stages with design solutions. And then we conducted another like collaborative design session with 7 researchers from different backgrounds. And here are some results. From the interview, they found it was good opportunity to create visual and easy to consume format for their paper. And they found our examples were well illustrated, and the stages and guidance was found very helpful to distill and about the required information and structure to structure their flow. 3 participants reported issues with identifying a target audience and deciding what information should be included and how detailed the comic should be. And this decision is related to the using scenario, I think. If it's to the lay audience, you can be more high level and be more like reader friendly. And if it's an expert, you can include more details. And we also found the most difficult with explaining multiple methods, complex stimuli, and explaining data transformation about analysis. And with data comics, in this project, we only focus on reporting quantitative results. We have tried a few examples to explain the qualitative studies, like explaining machine learning models, algorithms, and formulas. But still, we found it's quite challenging to provide any guidance or templates, and we think it will require more attention in the future. Yeah, that's some results, some work from this study. And that's 3 projects from my side, and over to Ben. Thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for this fascinating presentation on the topic that I'm pretty sure will have a great future. I was very sensitive to your presentation and to the fact that you started with a UN report and trying to say people have to go back and forth from the text to the graphics. You also mentioned people that are close to our heart here, to the data viz and to all data viz lovers, Hans Rosling, Mina, and all the people here. So thank you very much. And I think it's really inspiring presentation because, as you mentioned, and this is my first impression, we sometimes forget that the data are not the data by themselves. They represent something, people, country, events. And by putting the focus on there, and we just use data visualization because we had no way to represent these people. And I have the feeling that you solve this problem by putting the people back in the process, because we are not interested in the people. We are not interested in the visuals. We are interested in understanding something about the phenomena, the people, the country, whatever. So I found that really fascinating. I have 2 comments before I take some questions on the chat and maybe some answer for you. First, someone is mentioning the fact that the representation of the War Alliance map reminds the map of Asterix chez les Goths. So we know we are a big fan of Asterix here in France. So Zezhong, if you don't know Asterix, you should ask Benjamin. I'm sure Benjamin has some Asterix somewhere. And the other thing I wanted to show you, I brought a bunch of paper of books here, but some of your picture reminds me, this is a very old National Geographic, and what you mentioned in terms of zooming was already there, right? This is from 1980. So that's one first comment. The second one is, what is your relationship to mangas? This is manga science, and you see here, the framing may be different, right? But there are some stuff that shows some phenomena in a very visual way and explains some science here. Right. This one is in French, but obviously it's in Japanese. I also have some more recent work, because this is old. Manga science is very old. I have some recent work from friends that may see this video one day. This is about economics. This one is in Japanese. Sorry, I have one in Chinese somewhere. So once again, you have this framing explaining some phenomena. You know, you go to the curve and you understand that demand, supply, whatever this means. So I think all of that makes sense. And finally, this one you may not be aware of is the book from Euclid, Explain. Yeah, you probably know that. I found that very, very interesting. This is one of the books we put on our reference list on the website. And this is heavy, and you have all the demonstration there. So, and we have also French people doing, numbers. And so we have a lot of that. It's the cat in the country of numbers to explain something. So it seems that there are lots of ways to tell story. And it goes with my first question before. There is one here. There is one question by Alain, but maybe our first question is, what is your relationship to this culture that is already there? Is it inspiring you? Is it something that is really different? And where data visualization is specific to that?
This
yeah, sorry, man.
Zezhong was talking first. Over to you.
Yeah, I'm so surprised you got so many like these illustrative books, and yeah, those works are all our like source of inspiration. And I think you showed some of them, like for example the first one and the second one is about statistics. I think they're about stats. It explains some. Oh, that's the first one. Oh, the manga one, it's about economics, right? Second one was about statistics. I think some about some calculation and models. Yeah, those are what our inspirations from. I think data comics so far what we focus on, what we investigate is to still relation between the abstract data visualization and the narrative and explanation. And a manga, we see that types of comic, traditional comic, as I think especially indicating the Japanese comic. This is typically for their styles and also the tons of storytelling, the language tons. Yeah, I think that's it's more about style. If we say Marvels or manga, that's the two different visual styles. But there's a lot of common things. Of course, we will know the Understand comic by MacLeod and what they talk about, the transitions and flows, they're all the same. And also for data comics. And that's the common parts of ours. But I think what's unique about data comics we investigate is the relationship between the abstract data visualizations and the explanations and interpretations among those visualization techniques.
Okay, maybe Benjamin, if you want to add something before I move on to the question.
No, I think, yeah, to me, it's also this kind of novelty, I would say. I still struggle a little bit to explain or to express that these abstractness of data visualizations. And many people in teaching, I always get this question, oh, but what is about qualitative data? So, we're teaching data visualizations, all sorts of kind of charts, let's say. And people are often associate this with only quantitative data. So, and to a lot of large extent, this is also quantitative data. So one thing that is, I think, is special is the visual forms that we're showing these quantitative data and the visualization literacy that we kind of expect from the user side. So this is, Zezhong explained this in the context of this cheat sheets that we really struggled. And I think it is a novel concept. And right now, with all the COVID visualizations out there, suddenly people talk about logarithmic curves and curves at all, and things stacking and so on, and bubble maps, and oh yeah, but it's not really working, and la 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 la. So I think there's this space which makes these comics, the data comics, less accessible to some extent, because we need specific kind of data visualization literacy. But on the other side, if we think beyond this quantitative data, if we think beyond bar charts, line charts, pie charts, if we think about networks, if we think about geographic, geospatial data, if we think about temporal data, all these kind of more complicated things, I think this is where there's a lot of potential, because you can only use data visualization to do these things, and I think we need to wrestle with this as a to get this into our cultural repertoire, to say we know how to read these things, we know how to communicate with these things, we know how to educate with these things. So in the 20th century, children in the school, they learned about physics and chemistry and then so on, because that was the big thing in the 20th century, right? And it still is. But now we have computers, now we have data, and this is what we need to learn now.
Yeah, thank you. And then, yeah, I'm really also, you mentioned the cheat sheets. That I think it's a fantastic tool because it's accessible to many people, but maybe we need, to increase visual literacy by any means. Well, before we wrap everything up, we still have 5 minutes for question. And one question from Anna is, what is the work effort needed to build data comics regarding the difference between producing a data visualization and a standard one and the data comics? Is it a magnitude of 10, 100? I know that you are not sleeping, but because of your PhD, zezhong, but probably it takes a lot of time, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But how much?
Currently, because we have to make something, many things manually. Of course, there's some tools to support you doing those.
But sometimes it's easier to do manually, because when you struggle in a map, we have overlapping with some software that is not allowing you to. I mean, I know Alain has been struggling with not having superimposed bubbles, for example.
Yeah.
Manually, you can do what you do. So there are also some gains.
Yes, actually, I really love this question, and thank you. If we say the effort, for example, this position is exploratory data visualization, and this place is explanatory data visualization. And I think the effort to make data comic visualization is somewhere near on the right of this. I think you need to do a little bit more modification, because think about how you read those different formats. For exploratory data visualization, you are an expert. You don't need to care too much about the design.
Yeah.
For explanations, and there's a big chart. You need to think about design and communication. But for data comics, there's a linear reading order, and in each panel, and there's each individual visual to support the corresponding text. So some visuals, if they are not related to a task, probably you want to remove them, or to avoid adding more information, throw more information to overwhelm your audience. Yeah, that's my experience, but maybe different people have their own methods.
Yeah. I think we have a somehow related question about how data comics can survive to changes in the data. You do it for one set of data, and then the UN report will be you have to redo it each year. Yeah,
but what didn't change might be probably also the story might be changing. But if it does not change too much, you can reuse the template, the story template, or the layout if the story not changing too much. And even if we have everything digital, and we can include, for example, library of D3, and you can just switch to replace your data set, to replace your API if they have the same structure of your data set. And you don't need to do extra work. We hope we can have some tool to support that in the future.
I would have thousands of questions about, you know, the framing, the pace, and how close you are from data animates, because somehow, you know, the relationship between small multiples and interactive visualization is close. So here you are somehow sort of small multiples telling different stories, and so maybe the next step would be to have the data animates or flip books. I remember we discussed flip books once with Benjamin. But maybe just 1-2 minutes final words from Benjamin and from you, zezhong, and then we wrap up, and then we go together down to have more discussion if you want.
You mean wrap up?
On everything, I have also some question with your relationship between data art, for example, and because somehow you know, in France, comics is art. So,
which is right in France.
So maybe it's not a good thing to ask you for a final word, but if there was, what's next? Maybe the question is, what's next for you? I know for zezhong, it's the PhD. So what's next for the team? And do you need people to join you? Do you need more people to draw things? Where are the locks for more data comics in the world?
I think there's so many different steps from my side. I mean, each of the projects that we're working on can be its own, you know, research project. I think there's so much potential in the cheat sheets. A little bit of stuff we're working on right now, which we're trying to publish soon. Then, so basically increasing the accessibility of data visualization, literacy, knowledge. Right now, we're doing this through courses. And we have a course starting next week. I should probably share that as well. Which is a professionals course, which is open to UK, EU citizens. It's free. So this kind of education thing. And on the other side, I think it's tool building things. So you mentioned like data, you know, updating data. What do we do? Well, we need better tools. We need to lower the bar for people to get into this. And of course, so this is a 2 ways. And then the third ways is that we're also investigating now is into recommending support. So basically, do I need to start from scratch? Do I need to go through a whole set of analysis, or can a computer generate data comics basically to walk me through my data? And this is not trivial, because obviously it involves a lot of algorithmic work in the background. So those are just kind of 3 domains where I think the findings from this research are radiating.
Thank you so much, both of you. I will wrap up this meeting with a big round of applause. So you can open your camera and show how much we appreciate this talk. Finally, the really great thing in this very strange world that we can have you, and we probably will ask you to come back to show us more of your examples. And I see some people that, you know, are from the US and are quite involved in producing this kind of stuff, but in American language. So that you have big fans all around the world. Thank you so much, Benjamin and zezhong.